Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for joining us tonight. What do you really know about Real ID? Do you know our state already passed a law implementing Real ID in Tennessee? Is this something we should be concerned about? And if so, why? There's a bill to repeal Real ID in the current session of the Tennessee General Assembly, and we have two guests with us tonight that are very well versed on Real ID issues and the potentially unlimited power it gives to the federal government at the expense of individual citizens and states. We'll also be discussing legal challenges and proposed federal legislation as well as the need to repeal legislation in Tennessee that's already been passed. There are some misconceptions about the requirement for Real ID, and currently there are legal loopholes. Karen Bracken, founder of Tennessee Against Common Core and Tennessee Citizens for State Sovereignty, was TNCSS, and Twila Brase, president and co-founder of Citizens Council for Health Freedom, join us tonight to talk about this dangerous and intrusive program called Real ID. Twila runs the site, the cchfreedom.org, and you can find that. I apologize. First, it's time for the Informer Report. Few figures are as revered as Martin Luther King Jr., a civil rights icon and man of deep faith credited with uniting a racially divided America in the 1960s. But what if his reputation and legacy are more well-crafted myths than historical facts, intentionalized to subvert black communities and American society in favor of Marxist ideas? That's the argument of Chad O. Jackson. He makes this argument in his new documentary series titled The MLK Project, which premiered October 3rd at thehistory.com. Jackson recently sat down with the 1819 News podcast, where he and 1819 News CEO Brian Dawson had a wide-ranging discussion about the evidence for King's debauched lifestyle and detrimental impact on black Americans. Through painstaking research, Jackson, a business owner, independent historian, and filmmaker, uncovered disturbing facts about King's life that paint a picture of a calculated, manipulative philanderer rather than a role model for moral living. The more I delved into the history, the more I realized that Martin Luther King was not a friend. He was actually a foe, and a very deliberate foe, a deceptive foe, Jackson said. Someone who basically masqueraded as a pastor, even though he didn't actually believe or practice the gospel. I wanted to understand, well, why was that? And so when I began to find the answers, I felt that more and more people needed to know this stuff. And so that's why I set out to make this docuseries. Jackson described King as an actor and a really good orator. He used his status as the leader of the civil rights movement to advance government interest and Marxist causes and subvert the church with false liberation theology. He was very beautifully colored, Trojan horse, and people are still enamored of its colors and not really recognizing it for the Trojan horse that it is, Jackson said. A pastor and a civil rights leader by day and a sexual deviant and womanizer by night, Jackson claims King's private life diverted widely from his public persona as racial savior, an image maintained with the help of the corporate media. They went through painstaking efforts to make him this kind of larger-than-life figure, and they did this against the kind of backdrop of race oppression, which we find out now much of it was exaggeration, and not only that, instigation. We find out that they were instigating a lot of race tension in this kind of Hegelian dialectic way in order that King and his contingent might come out and look like the heroes, look like they are saving the day against these events and the struggle that blacks were going through in the South. He added, whenever I say these things and I deliver the evidence and I show the receipts to people, black or white, as I said, most people have the ear to hear. They listen, they consider, and most people are thankful and grateful for the information. However, there are some who aren't. And what's interesting to me is that white people who aren't, because they will say, well, you know, Chad, again, all these things that you're saying, even if they are true, King still did a lot of good things. He helped bring the races together. He's a good man. And part of me wonders, as a black man, and this is Jackson speaking, why do you feel this way? Because here I am, and I can actually see, like as a researcher and independent historian, I can see the detrimental effect that his rhetoric and this movement generally had on the black Americans. I can see that I was robbed of something, my generation was robbed of something because of the civil rights movement. King was basically advocating for government to be a fixture in every aspect of human life. That's what he was advocating for, centralization of power, Jackson said. That was his thing. I have watched parts of Mr. Jackson's documentary on Facebook. He seems very credible and thorough. He also mentions the many known communists that were part of MLK's team. Now I've got a little excerpt from Tennessee Stands, and we're going to talk a little bit about HB 809. This is the pesticide bill that will be in the House Judiciary Committee this Wednesday. Now the Senate version has already passed, so if it passes in the House, this thing is going to become law here real soon. Now this bill, if you don't know a whole lot about it, and I'm not going to be able to give you everything, I will recommend that you go to the Tennessee Stands website and look it up. It's one of their bills. If you look under the Take Action tab, it gives you the full detail on this. But this bill is going to amend the current code by adding a new section that provides legal protection to pesticide manufacturers and sellers under certain conditions. This liability protection gives a manufacturer or seller of a pesticide registered with both the Tennessee Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency under the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. It says that they cannot be held liable in a civil lawsuit regarding product labeling. Now, guys, this is a pretty complicated thing. You really need to get on there and read it. The people who support this legislation try to make it sound as if it's stopping frivolous lawsuits, and also that if you don't pass this, that the farmers cannot use glyphosate in farming, and that we're just going to have disaster for our farmers. That's not accurate. And this also involves some foreign actors. China and Germany are involved in this as well. So they are painting a negative picture. They make it sound as if they are just trying to stop greedy lawyers. But this is really important. And I would encourage you to go to the Tennessee Stands website, get more details, and then call the members of the House Judiciary Committee that, like I say, they're going to meet Wednesday. Now, this is a lot like the vaccine manufacturers, the protections they got back in '86. You can't sue the vaccine companies. And so we don't want that to happen. Now, this case is also before the Supreme Court, or things having to do with this case are also before the Supreme Court. I think they're coming up maybe later on this week. So we're not sure how that's going to turn out. But we can't really wait and see what happens there. Now, there is a possibility the bill will get rolled. I mean, that is always a possibility. And that would probably be a good thing. So make the calls, get on there. The different members of the House Judiciary Committee, that's who needs to hear from us. So please take the time to do that. They can tell when people are concerned about this. Also, if on the Tennessee Stands website, and I think there's others as well, you can send letters they already have ready that you can send to your senator or your rep. Now to a little more national news here. We did get some good news from the Trump administration in reference to the Muslim Brotherhood. They did designate certain chapters from certain countries of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. And that's good. That's a good thing. But, the Muslim Brotherhood, they are worldwide. And if you've ever read what their goal is here in America, the Memorandum of Understanding that's in, that the FBI found, 20, 30 years ago, so they've known about it for 20 or 30 years, their plan for America, which is being played out right now, we're seeing it all over the country, you'd have to wonder then, why is the whole Muslim Brotherhood not designated as a terrorist entity? And why is CARE, which has already been identified as a front for the Muslim Brotherhood, not designated as a foreign terrorist entity? So it's a start, but they really need to get hot on this because CARE is all over the place. There is talk that CARE will have an office opened in Tennessee soon. Hopefully that doesn't happen. And then, of course, you have to wonder, we're going to crack down on one group, but then we've got Qatar. We act like they're allies, but they're one of the biggest funders of Islamic terrorism around the world. So hopefully somebody will explain that to the administration pretty soon. Before we bring on our special guest here, here's a message from our sponsor, LifeWave, a unique product that uses light reflection to activate the body's own natural energy, supporting healing, improving performance, and combating aging without drugs or stimulants. Check it out. We'll be right back.
Light, the energy of life itself. Since the beginning of time, light has sustained us, fueled our growth, and shaped the world. Even Einstein recognized that everything we are is made of light. But what if we could harness the light within us, not just to live, but to renew, restore, and rejuvenate? Introducing LifeWave X39, the first product in the world that activates stem cells using our body's own light. Backed by clinical research, multiple patents, and over 10 years of stem cell research, a revolutionary wearable light technology that unlocks the power of activating our own stem cells with a single, safe, affordable, non-transdermal patch that puts you back in control of how you look, feel, and perform. Unlike drugs or chemicals, X39 works naturally, awakening your body's ability to heal and thrive. It's time to unlock your full potential, restore your vitality, and embrace a healthier, more vibrant you.
And now to our guests, Karen Bracken of TNCSS and Twila Brase, President and co-founder of Citizens Council for Health Freedom. Thank you both for agreeing to come on the show. How are you doing?
Great.
Very good. Thank you.
Just a little background for the audience on Twila. She's an RN, a PHN. She's, as I said, president and co-founder of Citizens Council for Health Freedom, a national patient-centered, privacy-focused, free market 501c3 health policy organization that was launched in 1998 to protect patient and doctor freedom. She's the author of 8-time award-winning book, Big Brother in the Exam Room, The Dangerous Truth About Electronic Health Records. Twila's efforts led to a 2014 temporary federal law requiring parental consent for research using baby DNA, the first ever parent-baby DNA lawsuit, and a decades-long campaign exposing HIPAA as a data sharing rule. She's founder of a national online directory of direct pay practices known as the Wedge of Health Freedom. She also launched the Patient Toolbox, an easy-to-use tool to help patients understand their options in coercive situations and to maintain control over their treatment decisions. During the COVID crisis, she initiated CCHF's Face Freedom campaign and Don't Be Bullied, Make an Informed Choice billboard campaign to stop the face mask and the vaccine mandates. In September 24, at her direction, CCHF launched a campaign against the proposed Real ID progressive enforcement rule, which over 3 weeks led to an additional 31,701 public comments by the end of the 30-day comment deadline. For 15 years, Twila has been producing the Health Freedom Minute program, heard weekdays by more than 5 million listeners on approximately 870 radio stations in 47 states. She provides testimony at state legislatures, meets with members of Congress and healthcare policymakers, conducts original research, speaks around the country, and has been featured or quoted by CNN, Forbes, Fox News, Fox Business, NBC, Politico, and others. And she has been found, she was designated in 2009 number 75 on the 100 most powerful people in healthcare. Karen Bracken was the founder of Tennessee Against Common Core and Tennessee Citizens for State Sovereignty. She was also involved in educating the public on the dangers of Agenda 21 and 2030 and has worked with numerous legislators on promoting legislation that promotes constitutional issues. For more information on TNCS and to read articles by Karen, visit tncss.weebly.com. She's currently working with members of the Tennessee General Assembly to repeal the Real ID in Tennessee. Twila, let's start with you. Real ID started in 2005, but many states pushed back until recent years. And you've done a lot of work on this, and I did read through the document that you sent, and we will have that posted on our website for the audience to see later. What was Real ID sold as, and what do we now understand it to be?
Well, the interesting thing about Real ID, I could tell you the history. I just want to tell you sort of like what it is first and foremost, and then the history is really interesting for what it was sold as. because I guess what people think, here's what people think it is. They think it is a state driver's license with a star. So they just think it has a little bit more security features. Maybe it's to protect against illegal immigration or, the whole open borders thing or terrorists.
Right.
It really came after 9/11. And so people think that it's just a driver's license with a few extra security features. And if you have a star, you've got those security features. But that's not true. The Real ID is a federal, sorry, yeah. What you have if you have a star on it is you have a Real ID. And then if you have a Real ID, what you have is a driver's license under federal control. So this is a federal ID card. It's a national ID card. It's under federal control. It's likely, if it doesn't get stopped, will become essentially a federal ID under federal control over all aspects of your life that you need identification for. And of course, when this initially started, as you mentioned, it came after 9/11, after the 9/11 report. But we did a legal analysis of this. Let me see, in late 2025. It came out in September 2025. And it's interesting what the attorney who did that for us, what they found, because there was an attempt to get this federal ID, this kind of ID, national ID, digital ID, before 9/11. But 9/11 and the 9/11 report really gave them the opportunity to move forward with what they had been trying for several years to do. And so 9/11 was the excuse, as it was with many things, to move in this direction. And when they put it into law in 2005, the Senate never heard it in a bill. There was never a committee hearing on it. There was never a conference committee on it. There was no debate before it came to the floor of the U.S. Senate as an amendment, sort of in the dark of the night. It just appeared in this national defense spending bill to provide funding for soldiers in Iraq. So it was on a must-pass bill. It just appeared overnight, and it was up for a vote, and that was in May of 2005. And
They do a lot of things that way. Dead of the night in a must-pass bill, especially if it's tied to the military.
well, and you're in Tennessee, so it was Senator Lamar Alexander on the floor of the U.S. Senate who said that this is really a national identification card. We've never done this before. There should be a public debate. But of course, there wasn't a public debate. It was a must-pass bill, and they had all sorts of comments on the floor, and then they passed the thing. Well, then 3 years later, the Department of Homeland Security comes out with a rule to impose to establish, to create, and then impose the Real ID. Well, that is the first time that state legislators really got wind of the fact. And so, and so they started to write bills and pass laws and pass resolutions around the United States, different state legislators who said, this is a violation of states' rights. The federal government cannot take this kind of power away from the states, all power over all identification under federal control. No, we're not going to do that. So they passed laws. They essentially stopped it. And it was pretty much stopped until 2007 until 2015, when President Obama heralded it from the rooftops that you can't fly in 2016 if you don't get a Real ID. And that's the first time that the national media picked it up and heralded it to the American people. And so once the American people got wind of this, they thought they wouldn't be able to fly. They started contacting their state legislators, saying things like, I have a winter home. I have a summer home. I have grandchildren in another state. I need to fly for my job. What do you mean I can't fly? And what do you mean that our state prohibits a Real ID in our state? I need to be able to fly. And the state legislators began to cave, and over the course of 3 years, all the states passed laws conforming with the Real ID or were deemed in conformance by Homeland Security because they were close enough.
Question. Was it true at the time when Obama said that you could not fly with a real ID?
It's never been true that you cannot fly, period. End of statement. There's actually no law requiring an ID to fly. There was a lawsuit. I'm trying to think exactly when that lawsuit was. Anyway, there was a lawsuit at one point where a guy wanted to really get the courts to rule on this thing about having to have an ID to fly. And what the courts instead ruled is that they ruled against this individual because they said, you could have flown, you just would have had to submit to a search. And so they never ruled on the fact that there is no law in the United States. Well, yeah, sort of there is now with Real ID, but sort of there isn't because it's unconstitutional. Uh, so, um, so anyway, they never ruled on that. But the fact of the matter is, this was a regulation that came out. There's no law on the books until the Real ID law of 2005. But then it's unconstitutional because it's a federal ID under federal control.
So are there any current lawsuits on this issue?
There are no lawsuits. We have a variety of avenues that it's interesting because we're a health freedom organization, right?
Right.
So you wouldn't think that a health freedom organization would come out or would take this on as an issue. But actually, back in 1997 here in Minnesota, where this organization is located, it was our Republican governor who decided to institute a MIN card in 1997. And that MIN card would have had a third-party contractor that would control the database. And it would have been used as for access to your phone, for access to your medical records, for access to your bank. It would have been everything, 1997. That's the first, I mean, our organization I started this work in 1995. This organization started in 1998, and I testified or moved against or in some way opposed that back then. And that was my first initiation into this idea of having a card for all of life. And so I think, from the very beginning of this organization, we were meant to tackle this issue. So we tackled it in 2008. And Minnesota became one of the states that said, no, we're not moving forward with Real ID. We tackled it in 2015 after Obama said that, and stopped it in 2016 here in Minnesota, but couldn't stop it in 2017. All the businesses wanted it. And so, here we are as a health freedom organization. But, from the very beginning, it was putting your medical records on
Right.
access on that card. And that's exactly what the Real ID will be. And I think that's one of the things that people don't understand. Because of course, people aren't reading the Real ID law, so what do they know,
Right.
right? And why wouldn't they think this is just a state driver's license with a star that's been called a Real ID? Because they aren't told anything else. And why wouldn't they believe they need it to fly? Because they're not told anything else.
So right now
But
you can fly and you don't have to have a real ID. What can you use to fly right now?
Yeah. So the TSA has 16 different identification cards that you can use, including a passport and a passport card. And if you get a passport, I would definitely get a passport card at the very same time. It's only about $30 more. It lasts 10 years, and it's just as small as your driver's license. So, I would do that. I would definitely, do that instead. But, the point I want to make for your audience is, what does the Real ID law say? The Real ID law says that the official purpose of the Real ID is access to federal buildings, nuclear facilities, commercial flight, and then it has these words, and any other purpose that the Secretary of Homeland Security shall determine.
So it's an
So
open-ended law. It's basically
yeah.
open-ended.
So that's when I say for all of life, right? So could it be that you need it to access medical care, or to access your bank account, or to get married or to get a hotel room or to work. Like they, that's what they plan to do in England. They said if you didn't have a digital ID, I mean, he just backed off of that.
Yeah.
But if you didn't have a digital ID, you wouldn't be able to work. So that is what our law says, is that the Secretary of Homeland Security, it could be in the next administration, it could be in this one, could simply add medical care. And why wouldn't they add medical care? Because medical care is paid for through local, county, state, federal government to the tune of about 47%. Why wouldn't they add medical care as the next required use?
Absolutely. And you said a minute ago that the businesses wanted it in Minnesota. Why did the businesses want it? What was their
I think they
argument?
wanted, I think they really wanted, well, arguments. There's so many lies told by so many people on the testimony table. Even though we'd come up and we'd say, okay, actually, Homeland Security says in their own rule that we cannot tell you that you cannot fly. I mean, that's what they actually say. So, but the authors of the bill would say the same lies over and over again. We have to have people fly. We can't, this, that, and the other thing, right? And so, let me see, what was your question there? Oh, the employers. So the employers, I think it really was, they didn't want to have any problems flying. And it's just like, get this thing over with. We'll have one card for flying. I don't even know if they knew what the law actually said about how open-ended it was, all the things that the federal government could suddenly seize control of
Right.
through this federal ID called the Real ID. But your audience, I guess I'd like them to know too, about how the DMVs, where the departments of motor vehicles, where they're going. Because in December of 2023, they testified to Congress that their plans are to digitize the Real ID, put it on our phones, and have remote access to it. So here's the fact of the matter, right? This is the government creating a database in the background, digital, and so they can turn it off.
Right.
They can turn it off. It gets pinged every time you use it. It will ping the government. Where are you using it? Who's next to you and they're using yours? Oh, you're all buying a meal together. Oh, interesting. Oh, and it's you can just see how far this would go.
Yeah.
But the other thing people don't realize is what the cameras are doing that are putting their photo on the Real ID. So the Real ID cameras are digital cameras,
Right.
and they're taking 50 points of your face. There's not just a regular photo. It's actually capturing data.
Biometric data.
Points. Yep, on your face.
Yep.
And so what this means is that the federal government has claimed a right to collect and catalog the coordinates of your body, starting with your face, for its own control. What's being built here is a national facial recognition system.
Yeah.
And nobody is telling the American public that this is going on.
Yeah.
And if you put all of these things together, what the law says, the open-endedness of the law, the digital, the remote access, the biometric control, what you have is everything you need for a China-like social credit system in this country.
Yeah, and throw in the flock cameras that they're pushing everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they can track you at all times. They know what you're doing, know where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, the song about total control. They all want total control. Yeah, apparently that's what they want. So, what are some of the other dangers that what you've said spells out a lot, but in terms of individual liberty and state sovereignty?
Right. Well, I'm just going to take this moment to tell people to go to refuserealid.org, refuserealid.org, where you can find all sorts of information, including this and a bunch of one-pagers and a map where people are making the switch back to a standard state driver's license, including in Tennessee. So when you do think of the dangers of a Real ID and liberty, you should also be thinking of how this could be turned into a vax passport. Remember how during COVID they wanted us all to have our vaccination status known, and that it was going to control whether we got into certain venues or buildings or events or even grocery shopping, right? So So there's that, and then there's the fact that it could easily be connected once it's digitized, easily connected to a global digital identification system, which I think is what they really wanted when they were creating the Vax passport. This was global. They planned to connect the United States with the rest of the globe wherever they could, get countries into it. But they weren't successful because we didn't allow them to do it. And when you look at what's happening with digital IDs around the globe,
Yep.
and if you really wonder, just get a publication for free called Biometric Update. Just sign up for their daily news because it shows all the places where a national ID is being imposed, the different things that all of life. If you don't, you're not a person. If you don't have a digital ID, you're not a person. And then when somebody decides to scrape your information
Yep.
and assume your character, it's not like changing a social security number, which I agree is not exactly easy, but you only got one face.
Right.
You got one set of fingerprints. And so somebody becomes you.
And then
And
how do
now
you prove,
what do you need to do?
how do you fix something like that? I mean,
That's
we
exactly
can't
right.
even get the post office to fix addresses when you move.
Yeah, and in India, so in India, they have a national ID card for 1.3 billion people or something. And I should tell you something about the company that's doing that because that very company has big contracts in this country with TSA. And but anyway, when they imposed the national ID card in India, there's a story of about 24 people who starved to death because they couldn't get the grocery store to approve of who they said they were. So the grocery stores refused to sell them food. And so if you're not you, just because you don't have a digital ID, or just because they haven't got the coordinates of your body correct,
Right.
then you are in danger. You're in serious danger at so many levels.
Yeah. If you thought being erroneously placed on a no-fly list was a problem,
Mhm.
I mean, this is going to be even worse than that. And you mentioned, so the states initially did not sign on to this. I don't know if there's still any that are holding out.
No,
None of them are holding out. Oh man,
no.
that's sad.
Mhm.
But back
Oh,
during,
but there is good news in that vein because we've sent a letter to President Trump. We had an interesting letter back from the TSA. Apparently, the White House decided the TSA should respond, and so we had that letter redlined because there's so much misinformation in it that we redlined it and we put it on our refuserealid.org website. So you can find it there. But we're also working with state legislators around the country, including in Tennessee,
yep,
to extract on bills to extract themselves from Real ID or to sort of screw up the system, as it were.
right,
Like to give people the right not to have a biometric photo, or to give them the right to always have a standard state driver's license with no biometric photo. We want people to switch back, but even some of those state driver's licenses still have a biometric photo. But by switching back, you are really thwarting what they want to do. Just switch back, get yourself a passport, switch back to a standard state driver's license, and do it now. Do not wait for
right,
your renewal period because the DMVs are going rogue and they're telling people you don't get a right to choose, some of them,
right.
even though there seems to be no law that says that they can deprive you of a standard state driver's license.
Okay, and that's across the country, not just in Tennessee. You can always go back and get a
Oh, yeah.
regular
No.
driver's license.
Well, there's only 5 states, according to Homeland Security, that say you can't have a standard state driver's license, and they're all Republican. Georgia, Florida, Texas, Mississippi, and Wyoming.
Wow.
All of them say you don't have any choice. All the others seem to have a choice, but we have found at least 6 additional states, including Indiana, Colorado, Maryland, and 3 others, where when people have gone, they say, no, 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 no. We're not going to let you switch back. But if you were to look at refuserealid.org, go down to the bottom, and there will be a map. That map is in red. And the redder the state, the more people that have made the switch back to a standard state driver's license. But we have a second question, which is if you tried to make the switch and were denied, let us know. So we don't have it on the map, but we've got the back, the behind the scenes data, right, on the
Right.
answers to that. And there are people who are being told no in states where people are being told yes. So there are rogue DMV agents just telling them, not in our DMV.
Right. Now, the TSA has a new charge for not having a real ID. You want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, it's a penalty. They call it a fee. It's a penalty. And so on February 1st, the TSA is going to require you to have a real ID or other acceptable documentation, or pay a $45 fee, fine, and then be biometrically photographed and scanned, and then biographically scanned. Which biographically and biometrically, I think that's going to encompass the things that they have always done if you appear at the airport without an ID. I don't know if either of you two have had that happen, but I did. I actually lost it in the airport on my way from Minneapolis to Denver. And suddenly I'm appearing at the TSA with nothing and realizing I can't find my money. I can't find anything. Anyway, they took me to a tiny little table with a phone, and he picked up the phone and he started asking me questions like, what was your first email address? What was the color of your first car? What was the color of your second car? All these kind of these questions until I could answer enough. But what the TSA says, when they made this announcement 5 days before Thanksgiving, and then they finalized it in December, is that there's no guarantee that you'll make your plane. I mean, they're just trying everything possible to get you to take the
Yeah.
real ID.
Just to
And
coerce
I
you to
guess
do it.
yeah, and I guess the thing I'd say about the penalty, I call it a penalty. We call it a fine at our organization. And here's why you should look at it like that. They claimed in their notice that they have a right to impose this fee because there is a law that says they can create traveler programs. Well, their current traveler programs are TSA PreCheck and Global Entry. Global Entry, you pay about $120 and it lasts 5 years. TSA PreCheck, you pay about $80 and it lasts 5 years. This program, $45 and it lasts 10 travel days. 10. If you take a 2-week trip, you will pay it
Yep.
coming and going and be put in a special line.
That's a racket.
So,
That's a TSA racket.
yep, it is meant to make you feel the pain because they want you to submit. They want you to give up your constitutional rights. They want you to violate 10th Amendment rights. And just as a reminder, the 10th Amendment is not just for the states. It's all rights not relegated to
Right.
the federal government in the Constitution are reserved to the states and
Or
to
the
the
people.
people.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Now, Rand Paul's got a bill dealing with this. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
He does, and he needs everyone who's listening to call his office, and I do mean call his office and say, thank you so much for that bill. Will you please hold a hearing? The bill number is S2769, and it's called Safeguarding Personal Information Act. Now, we weren't sure exactly, and we still don't know exactly how committed he is to that. He's always been committed. He's always been against national IDs. His father was against national IDs. He may be waiting for timing. It's hard to say. But he finally put out a bill. He actually did a press release on it, which gave us some hope. He did a tweet on it, and he put it in his newsletter. But that is where it stands. There are no co-sponsors yet, and we will be going after co-sponsors of that bill, but we need the American public to call Senator Rand Paul and say, thank you so much for your bill to repeal the Real ID. Please hold a hearing so that all the public can understand what this is and get rid of it.
Are there any other court cases or any? I know you did mention some of the resources, and we will post on our website the TSA paper that you sent us, so the people will have a reference to go back
Sure.
and look. But is there any other resources you'd like to point the audience towards, or any other cases? Because I do remember reading that in the court they have to tell you the truth, which may not be the same thing they put out in their written policy.
It's
So if you
true.
got some examples of that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so there's a case. There's a case of an American, and I don't know of what heritage, but an American who was picked up by the police, and he showed the police, and I'm guessing that he could be Hispanic, he could be Asian, I'm not sure. Anyway, he was picked up by the police, and he showed the police his real ID for identification purposes, right? And the police, and so in this court case where he is, the court case is against the police, or the DMV. I'm sorry, the Homeland Security. Anyway, Homeland Security has sent in a court filing, which says that the Real ID cannot be counted on to validate identity because all the states do it differently.
So they're pushing for it, but it can't even do what they say that it's intended to do.
Right.
And I think
Only the
this is
federal government could come up with something like that. You know that.
Yeah. So, I think that I mean, because of everything that's happening with illegal immigration, and this is what people think. This is why conservative Americans think, nope, we got to have the Real ID because it's going to stop people from coming across the border. It's going to stop illegal immigration. It's going to stop terrorists.
Right.
And in our legal analysis, our attorney who did this for us, who was the former Solicitor General of Louisiana, he found that no, that was not the case at all. In fact, the terrorists all had perfectly valid identities when they got on those planes. And we've had Real ID for 20 years. It hasn't stopped anybody from coming across the border. And Real IDs are given to people who are not citizens because all you have to do is have a legal purpose for being in the country. And so when you no longer have a legal purpose for being in the country, you don't lose your Real ID, right? And then we have states like New York who are issuing Real IDs to truckers, for example. And then in this one case, when they picked up this trucker, he had an ID. I think his name might have been Ahmed, but whatever the second name was, first or second name, don't know which it was, it said something like name withheld or
And they gave him a
not.
real ID.
Yeah, they gave him a
Gave
Real
him a real
ID
ID. Good
in the
Lord.
state of New York. So this is, of course, one reason why in that court filing they can say that we can't trust. We can't trust it.
Yeah. That's
But,
enough reason
but
right there. That is enough reason right there not to do it. And besides all the other infringements that you mentioned. Oh wow, this is crazy. I'm glad we had you on the show because I know that a lot of the people out there don't know about this or don't know this much about it, and I appreciate what you're doing. I want to switch it over to Karen real quick because there is a bill, as we said, that Tennessee passed it last year? I guess they decided to do it. So now we're going to try to repeal the bill in Tennessee. And Karen, what can you tell us about the legislation filed this year in Tennessee?
Okay, well, Representative Bud Halsey is the House sponsor of this legislation, and we've been working with a Real ID expert from Twila's organization, and we've been working with him since May 2nd of 2025. So we've been working on this legislation for Tennessee since May 2nd, 2025. So
Wow.
it's been a long process. And the bill is not yet finalized. We have a couple things that we need to tweak, fine tune on this legislation before Representative Halsey submits the bill to the legal department. And And we're hoping, that if this gets passed in Tennessee, that other states will pick it up. And I know already several states have already picked up this particular legislation and are interested in getting it passed in their state. Minnesota, which is where Twila is from, actually has already a couple years ago passed legislation addressing that official purpose that Twila talked about,
Right.
the three reasons why. So basically, in Minnesota, they said if the official purpose is ever changed, that they will repeal, get out of the Real ID process. And I think they also involved their legislature in that decision. And that law passed already. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to,
Real quick. Official purpose. That goes back to the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security is allowed to just,
right.
hey, here is now the purpose. And then next year, this is the purpose. And next year, that's the purpose, whatever. It's an open-ended law.
Right, and that's why they put it in there because they wanted to, and there's no they don't have to go to Congress to get permission to enhance or the official purpose. So just like when Twyla was talking about that it's going to be digital, Real ID will eventually be digital. The Trump administration was talking about the digital medical or health ID.
Yeah.
One of the platforms that's suggested for that digital medical health record is a digital driver's license. So just start connecting all the dots. We've got Real ID, it's going to become digital. Once it becomes digital, it will end up being our digital ID for everything, everything. So anyhow, with this legislation, I'm just going to go through kind of like the highlights because, like I said, it's still a work in progress, very close to being complete. Hopefully, this week we'll get that done.
When's the filing deadline?
The filing deadline is noon on January the 30th. So I believe usually our deadlines are mid-February.
Yeah.
But because this is an election year, I think they're slam everything in. I think they're going to shorten up the session and get people back out on the campaign trail. But anyhow, one of the parts of the bill is that Real ID will always remain voluntary in the state of Tennessee. And although most people don't understand that Real ID in Tennessee is voluntary and there are no exceptions to that. So when you go into your DMV in Tennessee and they tell you you have to have a Real ID because you just moved into the state from another state or because you have a CDL driver's license, you have to push back. It's not true. So another one of the provisions in this legislation is a prohibition from collecting, capturing, storing, or using any biometric identifiers in connection with a non-Real ID license. They shall not retain copies of original or secondary source documents used to verify identity when issuing a non-Real ID compliant driver license. Any information collected on an applicant getting a non-Real ID, and I keep saying and emphasizing non because I'm sharing with you the advantages of a non-Real ID driver license. Any information collected on an applicant getting a non-Real ID compliant driver license, except under a few situations, cannot be shared or accessible to interstate, federal, or international databases. And the one exception is any valid purpose related to the national law enforcement telecommunications system. We have a transparency section in this bill, and this is one of the fine-tuning parts of this bill. We're probably going to remove the transparency piece from our legislation because Senator Johnson has an excellent bill covering the entire transparency issue, and it really is a good bill. So
transparency as it relates to.
Well, basically what Senator Johnson's bill says, if you go into motor vehicle to get a license or renew your license, you have to fill out a form where you designate on that form what kind of a driver's license you want. I want a real ID or I want a regular Tennessee state driver's license. And there's a whole bunch of information on that form. It lists the 16 um, uh, IDs that you can use so that you can travel if you don't have a real ID. It's got a lot of information on there.
Is he the
But
Senate
it,
sponsor of the Real ID bill as well?
well, we're talking to him about, being the sponsor of the Real ID bill. So he hasn't confirmed, but we did have him on a call with Twila's expert that we've been working with on this legislation. So we're hoping that he does do it because last year he passed legislation that says digital driver's licenses will never be mandatory in Tennessee. So we're really kind of already covered if they ever try to, make real ID digital. So anyhow, we're hoping that he will. So the transparency piece, we're probably going to remove and let Senator Johnson run with this transparency issue. There is a penalty and an enforcement in this legislation. There is a severability clause. And the most important part of this bill is addressing the official purpose. And basically, if the official purpose is ever changed, that Tennessee will withdraw from the Real ID agenda. This is the part that we're still fine-tuning the wording on this section. So once we get that done, the bill will get filed. And there's an effective date on this bill of October the 1st. We had discussed bringing it all the way out to the end of the year. I did not want that. I want the effective date to be before the election.
Yeah.
Because if we push it out to where it goes into 2027, you've got all new legislators, a lot of new legislators, that could turn this around. So October 1st is the proposed effective date right now. So, I mean, that's pretty much what the bill covers. There's a lot more detail to it, but these are the major pieces. And like I said, Minnesota already passed a bill to address the official purpose issue. But we also have, I think it's Iowa. What are I have a list here of the different, oh yeah, it's Wisconsin, Arizona, Colorado. Iowa has already taken the Tennessee bill to their legal department. And like I said, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Colorado as well. So states are picking up on this.
Good.
And it's our hope that they more states will join us.
Back to the biometric for just a second, because I got a question from one of the viewers. He says that they refused the Real ID, but the picture was taken with the same camera.
Yes.
Are those cameras equipped with biometric? Is it like
Yes.
so you can use the
Yeah.
same camera, but what do you push a button or what to change it?
Right. They're taking a biometric picture on both driver's licenses in Tennessee. They're using,
So Real ID or not, they're still taking a biometric picture.
yeah, and we addressed that in this legislation as well. Like I said, there's a lot more details that I didn't cover.
Right.
I'm covering the main points, but it does address the biometric issue. One of the things that we really tried to do was craft this bill so that it did not invoke a fiscal note.
Right. Right.
So if we go and say, okay, you got to change out all your cameras or whatever,
Yeah.
it's going to be a fiscal note because they're going to use that to kill
Right.
the bill.
Yeah,
So
and for the audience out there that might not be familiar with some of the shenanigans in our General Assembly, if there's a bill they don't want to pass, then they will create a fiscal note. Oftentimes, in my opinion, they just create it out of thin air. But sometimes it's legitimate, and they say, "Oh well, we can't do that." Or if we do pass it, we got to put it behind the governor's budget, which means it's probably not going to get funded, so it's not going to mean anything. That's just one of the things that they pull. But if it comes back with a no fiscal note or a low fiscal note, and I will say this, since Johnson is part of the establishment, if he gets on board with this, it probably has a better chance of getting through the House, unless they decide they just want to, getting through the Senate. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we'll get it through the House. And do you know the path in the House that it has to take?
well, it has to go. I don't really know the actual committees, but of course it has to go through a subcommittee and then a full committee and then the full floor of the House.
Right.
And Yeah, I mean, Senator Johnson is a very highly regarded senator, and he has a lot of influence. But I kind of recommended him because of the fact that he passed
Right.
that bill last year that says we will never allow digital driver's licenses to be mandatory in Tennessee.
Yeah. And
So
kudos where it's due. I don't usually have a lot of good things to say about him, but kudos where it's due. So now
absolutely.
I'm sure there's going to be opposition from somebody. Who are we expecting the opposition from? And is there any federal money tied to this? Because you know what happens when the feds dangle money in front of our legislature. You know how that works out a lot of times.
Yeah, and I know there was federal money at one time. Twila might be a better one to ask that. I don't know if they still provide any federal funding to implement this program. I mean, it's a federal program, so I don't know. I know in the beginning there was federal money involved
Any idea,
with the
Twyla?
state.
Yeah, it was initially federally funded, and then I can't remember the year, but it's in our legal analysis where they decided to withdraw all funding, and now the states are on their own. So it is
Okay.
an unfunded mandate, essentially, and so all the costs are borne by the state.
Yeah,
Yeah.
another argument against it. Good.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay. So that you know of right now, Karen, I mean, you're not expecting, nobody's signaling opposition early on?
Not right now. We haven't heard anything. Bud hasn't heard anything, but I'm sure that it will, whether it come from the federal government or the attorney general. I'm told that our attorney general is not real thrilled about the real ID. So,
Good.
so hopefully, if we can get him on our side, it'll help get it passed. And I mean, it's really, the most egregious part of the bill is addressing the official purpose, that we
Right.
say we're going to withdraw if the official purpose gets changed. But again, that we're working on that language to make it a little more palatable and
Yeah.
easier to get past.
Right.
So that's going to be changed. But
Well, I mentioned
I,
that you're the. Did you have something else, Twyla?
I was just going to say, also egregious, and it's a little more hidden, is the idea of building the facial recognition system.
Yeah.
And I just want to tell listeners that when you're at the airport, there is a process that you should use. You are able to opt out of the camera. I really believe that the camera is teaching the computer how to see you in all the iterations that you might come in, because they'll take your ID, right? And then they'll take a picture of you. And sometimes you might have a hat, and sometimes a beard, and sometimes a scarf, and sometimes glasses and everything, right? And I think that's why they're doing it. They're also desensitizing you. And so many people just like step up to have the picture taken. They don't have any idea this is a whole biometric that's like, data points. All the signs say that you can object, and you can object. There is a bill in Congress, a bipartisan bill called the Travelers Privacy Protection Act, which they are trying to get through to shut down those cameras. But those cameras are part of this whole deal. And the company that I mentioned before, that I didn't say what the name of it is, but it's IDEMIA, IDEMIA. And IDEMIA has about 5 contracts, I think, with the US government. They have a $46 million contract with TSA. And so they run the cameras. You will see IDEMIA if you just look at that word, look at all the equipment that's around the
Right.
TSA agents, and you'll see IDEMIA. So I think that some of the objections could certainly come from those companies that are making millions being part of this. But you need to figure out how to protest, and refusing the camera.
Right.
And just saying right up front, refuse the camera, and then you can hand them your passport card, or your passport, or one of these other IDs. If you hand them your card first and they put it in, and then you say, "I'm not going to do the camera," you're going to have a battle on your hands,
Right.
one that you should still win.
Now,
I
don't
have
they
still
claim
won.
that they delete those photos? And isn't that the
Yeah.
claim?
Yeah, well,
no,
maybe they delete the photo, but do they delete the data points? I don't know.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
Right?
So.
right. Well, the IDEMIA cameras are used in the state of
Yep.
Tennessee. Every DMV department.
Yep.
We have
Wow.
IDEMIA cameras, and they're used not only for the real ID, but they're using the same camera for, and one of our questions was, can the camera be recalibrated to, be used for the non-real ID? And, no, IDEMIA is biometric. Their camera equipment is all biometric. So if we were, I would like to see them get different cameras for the non-compliant driver license, and perhaps maybe we'll go after that next year.
Right.
But again, we don't want to invoke any any fiscal notes on this legislation.
Right.
Yeah, but relatively speaking, in comparison to what things cost, just a regular camera is very inexpensive.
Yeah, yeah.
They'll try and make it as expensive as
And our
possible.
Bud's question was, well, gee, what did we do with all the cameras that we had?
What
Are
did
they
they do
just
with
in
all those
a
cameras?
storeroom somewhere? We could just pull them out and use them. So that'll be addressed. It's not an issue that we're, going to give up on.
Right.
Mhm.
Now, you're also the founder of TNCSS, Karen, and of course, we've talked about that, and we've had you on the show before, and we've talked a lot about TNCSS, Tennessee Citizens for State Sovereignty. And the main goal is, of course, getting the nullification process bill through that we've been
Yes.
working on for, 3 years now.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, Bud Halsey and Senator Janice Bowling again will, for the fourth session, submit the nullification process bill. And it's not a bill that, legalizes nullification, because it's already a legal constitutional option. This legislation, all it does, because as Dave is aware, in 2021, we passed a joint resolution, SJR 9005, supporting the act of nullification. So our assembly has said, yes, we acknowledge it, we support it, but we never use it. So what Jeffrey Cobble, who is a lawyer here in Tennessee, constitutional expert, he drew up a bill that creates 5 different pathways in which to invoke nullification. So we're giving the assembly a process to, when, the federal government violates the Constitution, which they do probably 95% of the time, that the states can invoke one of 5 different ways to nullify. So anyhow, as far as this legislative session is concerned, we have a lot of legislation, really critically important legislation, most of it sponsored by Representative Halsey,
Yep.
which is no
That was a
surprise
good one.
which is no surprise to most Tennesseans. But if you want to keep informed about this legislation, gold and silver, the nullification, we've got a bill to cap property taxes, local property taxes, ballot access bill, and of course this real ID bill, all sponsored by Representative Halsey, by the way. Please sign up to our Substack, tncss.substack.com, and that's where you'll be kept informed. And when we need help, phone calls, emails, that's where you'll get all the notifications about that.
There's a lot of good information on that site. There's a lot of good articles that talk about the history of nullification, talk about the history of our country. And as you said, we passed SJR 9005. The House and Senate of Tennessee, it was unanimous. Now, Lee didn't sign it, but he didn't have to sign it. It was unanimous. We still have most of those same senators, to include a lot on the committee that we've had so many problems with, who just seem to have conveniently forgotten that they've signed off on nullification already. And now they act like, oh, no, we can't do that. That's unconstitutional. So they're hypocritical. But, I mean, we already have proof, that they agreed to it once. They already have shown they have the authority to do it.
Well, my personal viewpoint is that the certain members of certain committees have been told by the Attorney General, the Attorney General is not in support of this bill.
Right.
And he's made that very well known to a lot of the power brokers in our Tennessee Assembly. So the pushback, I believe, is because of the Attorney General.
I would agree. And well, Governor Lee as well. Hey, thank you both for coming on the show. Great information. Appreciate what you do, and appreciate you taking the time to come on and join us, and definitely have you back. Appreciate all your efforts, Karen, in our legislature on this bill and others. And Twila, your website, we are going to post that information that you sent me. We will post that on our website so people can access it. And great site, guys. You need to check it out.
Yeah. It's got great resources regarding Real ID. I push the website all the time, so you're not going to find better resources about Real ID anywhere else like that particular site.
Well, absolutely.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you both for coming on. Thank you for all you do. I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, so please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. We are trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers. We need about another 150, and that will help us out a whole lot if you'll do that. So please pass the word, share it with your friends, and subscribe. Thanks again to David Baldwin for his generous donation and support. We really appreciate it. Check out our audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, tninformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. The Stewart County GOP will meet this Thursday, January 22nd at the Stewart County Visitor Center, 6:30 p.m. Monty Fritz, candidate for governor, and Tom Davis, Tennessee 4th District candidate, will appear at a town hall event Saturday, January 24th from 12 to 4 p.m. at 1257 Northwest Broad Street in Murfreesboro. The Jackson County GOP welcomes Monty Fritz January 27th, 6 p.m. to hear his plan for liberty and less government. The event will be held at the New Hope Baptist Church, 311 North Murray Street, Gainesboro, Tennessee. Monty Fritz, once again, will be speaking at Lucille's Cafe, 2231 Madison Street, Clarksville, Tennessee, 31 January at 6:30 p.m. Come out and meet Monty and get your questions answered. Remember, veterans, that Monty is the only veteran in the race. For our second hour tonight, we will be joined by author Frederico Lyons to talk about his book, The Road to Liberty, bringing an end to the 16th and 17th unprincipled amendments. Should be interesting. And the 16th Amendment, I think we can all agree, has been a disaster. This Wednesday, January 21st, 8:30 p.m., we will have a special show with Bernadette Pazier to discuss the pesticide bill that's working its way through the legislature. Now, unfortunately, when we scheduled this show, we did not know that bill was actually going to be in committee Wednesday morning. Okay, I mentioned that earlier. That's House Bill 809. You need to call the House Judiciary Committee and encourage your legislators to oppose that legislation. But we will talk about that bill, good, bad, or ugly, no matter what happens Wednesday night at 8:30 with Bernadette. Okay, tune in and learn out what our GA is up to again. For our shows next week at 7 p.m., we will have Joshua Doggerel here to talk about his experiences with cancel culture as a police officer who was harassed by the Southern Poverty Law Center and lost his job for just speaking at a Southern Heritage event. Hear his story from the book Doxed. And at 8:30 next week, we have Representative Bud Halsey and Attorney Don Grandy here to discuss the great taking and what our state needs to do to protect our investments from unscrupulous financial institutions. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.